Welcome to Corporate Underground, and in our episode today, we'll be uncovering the future of work. What is it that we would like to spend our time valuing most? How do we build our own capacity for what we want to spend our time doing? How will we build our own futures, disciplines, skill sets? Are there areas of our lives that do not impact our work? Can we separate our life professionally and personally? Join us as we investigate how we support each other during unknowable times. Welcome to Corporate Underground, everyone. We've sort of skirted around the topic of the future of work, especially during times of COVID, and this pandemic has really brought us into the aspects of the future that we've been trying to understand, I think, for a really long time. The pandemic has sort of pushed us into these sorts of questions of what kind of environments do we want to have when we're working? What kind of people do we want to be working with? What kind of activities do we want to be doing when we're working? Especially at these moments where we're sort of trying our best to step into increasingly better ways of communicating, and what kind of work, I suppose, is the most important to do during even the times of a pandemic. So Matt, I'd love to start with you. What do you think about the future of work, and how do you think it's affecting us right now?
I think it's the change that we needed to have, to be really direct. The issues that we've come up with were so much about us working longer hours, working heavier, spending more time away from our families while we're trying to earn more and more money. And I think we've had a big reset to be able to work from home, to reconnect, to find other ways to do that. I think we're still very, very early in that stage. And I think that there's going to be a whole bunch of openings in regards to just sharing more time. I know I'm spending a lot more time with my family and my children. And I know a lot of friends of mine that were top in banking haven't seen their kids at all. They fly all over the country and now they are. So there's a really big difference in regards to how we're working to allow that to connect. And it's more honest than it ever has been before. What do you think, Tony?
I think, we're naturally seeing, these questions rising, right? Because you've got every office job working from home right now, being forced to work from home, especially here in Melbourne, Australia, is that, no one that works in an office that can work from home is going back to work for a while. I think we're all seeing the positives of it as, it's all like, hey, I never want to go back to, do that commute again and stuff like that. But I do believe that there will be a natural hybrid. I feel like this has been the awakening that people will do their work. They will still be productive, despite having, working remotely and stuff like that. But there are a lot of benefits from, I guess, working in an office that, are being missed out on. And I feel like there are still a lot of people, even those full-on introverts, people would probably still be missing some parts of the office environment. So I think it's about what is the best world that we can create going forward. What have we learned about not being allowed to go to the office compared to when we weren't allowed to stay home? Like, we've had both extremes. What's the best way to build that happy medium, really?
Adam, what do you think?
The first is that although productivity is significantly up as a result of this digital working environment that we're all going through, creativity is down. I think there's a real challenge in this environment for creative industries, for people who, by virtue of their work, need to collaborate, need to be involved with people. I do think you lose something in the translation of what we're doing.
Finn, what do you think? What do you think is the future of work? And how do you think it's sort of taking place in our lives today?
First off, I think that there's this terminology, the future of work, and it's being brandied around just like the fourth industrial revolution. People love to categorize things. And so I look at the future of work as, what we're going through. I think there's globalization happening. I think there's demography changes happening, older workforces. I think technology and artificial intelligence is having a big play in it. I think there's a lot of different things that are changing on a daily basis how we will work in the future. And I think what I'm seeing, not only just from what everyone else has been talking about, is if you're looking to project into the future, is about this sort of fusion of your existing skill set and what makes you unique. So I believe part of, at least in my view, a big part of the executive type workforce in the future will be a shared economy, whereby there'll be shared roles. So boards, leadership will be shared amongst a number of people rather than one person doing a specific role. And I think that sort of gives this capability experience to be able to sort of have different people coming in and out of roles to be able to sort of provide the best capability. I'm certainly seeing that in some of the work I do is being able to, you sort of talk about that consulting role moving into sort of a semi-quasi-permanent role. It's an interesting space. I think Adam's point about the creative aspect, obviously I'm involved a lot in the entertainment and the media and the creative industries, and they are massively suffering. But I think that the future of this work, it's still yet to be played out. But inherently, I think this whole concept of us being a cog in a machine to fill a role whereby it's a role that can be replaced by artificial intelligence has got to be sort of, that has to evolve into how can we sort of take our existing experience and what makes us unique as human beings, and how do we fuse that together so we can actually start to come up with our own identity, or how do we upskill into something that we're actually passionate about, where we can start to use our existing experience to create a new identity for ourselves. Because, I look at nearly everyone that they say, I'm a CEO or a CTO. To me, that's, again, a piece of metadata that describes a function of a job specification that may or may not be there in the future. Yet, what makes a person individual, if they can tap into that and then look for the needs analysis of what's happening in the market and be able to be agile enough with that, is to be able to start to come up with these new job terms and these new functions, which are a product of value rather than a product of a job spec. So my long-winded rave here is I have no idea what the future of work looks like. I certainly don't think that any description I've heard about it actually describes what the future of work is. I don't think anyone knows, but I think it's got to be back to value and looking at being able to understand where the market's going.
I think one of the other things, sorry, about that's really interesting that you just said, Finn, is around there's a natural fluidity to the technology. And so when we talk about future of work, we're either kind of horizon setting and saying what's it going to be like in 10 years or what's it going to be like in 50 years. But the other thing is, as this becomes the new normal, more and more people are working on technologies and platforms and tools to help us get through this kind of environment. And the pace at which new technologies will start to get deployed and used will mean that the new normal is going to change very often, because a platform that's available tomorrow wasn't available today, and all of a sudden that might become the way that we work. And then, and so I think we've got this significant period of sort of controlled chaos coming up.
Yeah. Well, look at that with Burning Man and some of these other huge festivals. It would have been imperceivable a couple of years ago that something like Burning Man is now held online. And that's sort of something that people could never imagine, those two, and the ethos behind Burning Man being a digital format. Yet that's a whole new lush forest of creativity, and who knows what that will bear. So to your point, I agree 1000%. And I think that being able to be agile enough to explore these platforms, not be afraid of them, is what's actually going to help cultivate what this future of work looks like.
How do you recommend people navigate this current future? Because I want to talk about, like, there's future, like you said, which is 5-10 years, but literally we've got 24 months ahead of us right now, which you need to plan for, but you can't over plan. And we all have done something with companies helping, like we've all done roles where we help companies strategize or help them plan and stuff like that, or rethink. But the problem is now you still need to have a plan, because everyone's looking to leaders for like a direction, right? But at the same time, it is such an agile environment that you can't overinvest in that strategy. So, like, what do you see as like recommendations for someone in a leadership role that maybe has 10 to a freaking 100 or 1,000 team members? Like, how do you organize and plan under the freaking climate that we're in now?
There are basic things that I think would have been relevant before, but just become increasingly more pronounced now. So things like being tech agnostic. And so not saying we're only going to invest in this platform and that's what the next X number of years is going to look like is the first thing. I think the other thing is grounding yourself in your strategic why. And so it's one thing to go, well, this is how we used to deliver our service and our product. This is what we used to mean to clients. And because we can't necessarily mean that, why do we exist? What is the purpose of this organization? what is the value that it's meant to be bringing, and what's the functionality that comes across with that. And then we can figure out how to deliver that value if it's still relevant in the digital world. And if that value is no longer relevant, how do we pivot so that we remain relevant and we can continue to exist? And then the other thing is, I think that a huge part of leadership going forward is going to be around empathy and understanding that, you know, this environment that we're in now is very different for managing staff. You know, even you look at the people that are on this computer now, and you look at the backdrops, and being in a visual medium constantly, you're bringing people inside your home. They get to see what your house looks like. They get to see what your furniture looks like. They get to see how you dress. Everything about, you know, there was an office and there was a home thing, and we had this delineation between the two, and that doesn't exist anymore. And so that will raise anxiety for a number of people. It means you have to be able to make sure that you're in touch with your team's emotional needs, that you can walk them through periods that are not stressful, that they're able to engage when they need some more love, that you can provide that, whether it's digitally or not. I think there's some basic leadership skills that will just become more necessary now.
I agree, Adam. I think that there's, you know, if one can continually assess value for the customer, value for internally for what the organization is, and then be prepared to explore. So with these platforms changing so much and the new technologies, a lot of people don't explore and understand the value that these things can give them. And so that just that ability to say, I'm going to spend 5% of my time exploring new technologies and what they might be able to do for us from a reach and frequency point of view, from a brand exposure point of view, from a message point of view. That to me is the way to keep agile, is to keep exploring. If you shut down and go, this is the way we used to do it and this is what we stand for, that doesn't have to change what you stand for if your core values are intrinsically there. But the way you can reach an audience and the way that the audience is connecting, it's important to make sure you are exploring, to make sure that you can adapt and be agile enough to what Tony's saying. At least that's the way I look at it.
There's a comfortability around what has happened in the past for a large majority of us. If you're a lawyer or an accountant or an architect, you sort of fell into these sort of groups where you went away and you into university for a number of years, you learned a lot of technology, and for the first 2 years, you learned something and then you just gave it straight back as you learned it, and you got marked if you remembered what was said. Now, the creativity is coming through in a lot of different ways. I mean, Finn, you did a talk a couple of years ago that really had an effect on me around left brain and right brain thinking around the creatives. And you look at where lawyers are, most of them hate their jobs. Most of them have been there for 10 or 15 years, hate it, and don't like the billing structure or the billing systems or anything. A lot of accountants, but they've been there for so long and got such a debt that they've built up, or a way of earning at a certain level, that they don't want to leave. Now, this is changing. This is changing. University is changing. I mean, people aren't bringing the money in from overseas anymore. There's a massive change that's going to go through. If I want to find out anything about law, because I had the most law books, I was the leader in that. Now I can just Google anything. If I wanted to be a doctor, I just had the most medical books. But now I can go and get a blood sample and get a test and find out what I've got.
But to that too, I think, you know, like what's interesting to me is that, yes, AI and technologies can go and do search case filings and find out and do a lot of the background information, but you cannot sue or represent a client in a non-human perspective right now. So the ability for the experience and the human experience in understanding those dynamics, where, you know, a lot of the lawyers I talk to understand or are starting to tap into their creative aspect by looking at how they creatively solve problems and put puzzle pieces together of evidence. And so when you look at that through a lens of creativity,
what they're going to have to change, though, is exactly that. Not that combative and trading of information, but actually that counselling, or that enabling people to actually understand and get through the problem that is a divorce. There's 75% going to this person, and you want somebody to actually hold your hand through that. If I've got diabetes, I need somebody to hold my hand. So it's going to be a lot more of that counselling side of things that humans do really, really well. And that Adam's point, you know, just being a bit more emotional and open to that. I mean, Tia, what do you think? I mean, around this, you're very much in the education space and about the learning of coming through, and you've seen a lot of this. How do you see that actually changing?
Yeah, I totally see us walking down this road called unknowable road. And the pandemic is one of the most obvious aspects of our ability to take on something that we didn't know was going to happen. So there's an entire sort of situation that we've had to readjust to, but it's the first time that we've had a global experience in doing so. And what we've realized up until this point is all of our roles were cookie cutter roles. We had a very specific role. If you went online, you could see very specific skills that you needed. And I think this has somehow, become less and less important. And what has become more important is being able to connect with people in a different way, considering now our connections are not physical. And many of us rely on that physical touch or physical presence of another human being. I mean, many of my coworkers I haven't seen in months. This is different from my stepping on a plane and traveling to another part of the world and coming back again. There's a sort of knowledge that things will be a very particular way. So walking down unknowable road means that you trust in a process that's unraveling, that you don't know what's going to happen next, but it's okay not to know. But it's also this desire to accept what's happening, because I think there is this sort of like the agitation of not wanting what's happening right now. Not being comfortable with it is one thing, and settling into that discomfort is part of the process of accepting what's happening right now. But not wanting it and trying to change it to go back is almost like putting your feet, on the brake of a car. Even though it's moving in a particular direction, it might be going in a direction, but putting the friction on, the denial of it is really quite harmful, because that's the way that the energy is flowing. So the moment that you put your foot on the brakes, it is almost as if you don't want to accept what's happening. And if you do, then you think that you're in an emergency situation to put your foot on the brake, but actually what you're doing is creating even more friction against what's actually occurring.
So how do you stop that friction from happening? How do you actually?
Yeah, it's a really good question about the sort of like accepting the mode and the mannerisms of the new organism. We've turned into a new organism, not just by virtue of this new virus entering our lives, and we are, fungus, virus, bacteria, all of these exist in our life, and many of the fungi that are in our lives, even underground, have existed way longer than we have. I do think, however, when it comes to sort of adjusting to a new situation, we've got to be ready for unknowable situations that we have no idea about. And the longer we create that sort of friction, we're not able to allow whatever needs to flow to occur. So how do we step out of our own way? How do we create environments where it's okay to not know? Like Finn's work on super amounts of creativity. Okay, that didn't work. Let's try something else. Okay, this is not the way that we need to operate in a work environment. What can we do about it?
I think it's interesting too, because to me, if you identify yourself as a blob, as one object, as one role, as one type of organism, versus a number of fragments that can be moved around and recompartmentalized, you are much more agile when you are, 1 minute I'm a musician, next minute I'm doing a talk, next minute I'm building a tech company, or next minute I'm speaking on this. And these are all things that I'm passionate about, and they form an organism together, but they can stand on their own. It gives this flexibility to pull and push and remold, rather than this is my identity and I don't fit anymore, so I'm a square peg going in a round hole. And I think that once we can identify these things of our lives, which are all passionate to us and we're all good with, and start to connect those dots, which you might not see how they connect, but how does a musician connect with building a tech company, being a public speaker? There's all a connection there, and being able to sort of see that thread.
Can I just do privilege watch for a second? Because Finn, I couldn't agree with you more, but I think it's important that we just become aware of our own privilege right now on this call.
Of course.
Yeah, there are a couple of things about this. So most people don't get to do what the five of us get to do, and they don't have the luxury of being able to move in and out of different roles and be different people, because they go to a job, they have a boss that they don't like who's normally not very nice to them. They are plugged into a very specific output. They're measured to within an inch of their lives, and they're desperate to hold on to their job, because in this economic climate, you can't afford to lose your job. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think we should be aware of with future of work that is inherently digital, is that it provides, whilst it brings a lot of us together and creates efficiency and productivity, it also creates an enormous opportunity for even more further entrenched disadvantage for people who can't get access to digital, who can't get Wi-Fi, who can't afford good computers, who, if you have to exist online and you can't get online, you're effectively out of the workforce. And if that's the case, that will create a lot more problems than even we're currently seeing.
Yeah, but I just see that as an opportunity for someone to provide that for the people who don't get the Wi-Fi. So I think there's a birth. There's a birth in everything about someone seeing an opportunity and creating a new role that never existed before.
In terms of the way that the cell, like the organism cells operate, is to give every cell the opportunity to be something that it wants to be. And I think where communities of social workers, for example, cleaners, for example, haven't been able to go to the office to clean the office or whatever, it's sort of a question of what they were doing. Is it applicable today? Is the role that I was playing right now applicable in the future? Is there something else that I would like to be doing? If this moment is that moment of transition from the previous way of working to a new way of working or a different way of working, that cell in the organism has the opportunity to, reformat itself. And I think this is that reformatting stage where, yes, we can take a step back and observe where we're going, but also realize that we don't want to go down that route if we don't wish to.
There's a point, right? When you go to a supermarket, you've got a choice. You've got a choice to either go through an automated machine or to go to a human. And that choice has been taken away more and more and more. What's happening with that is that's an entry-level job for somebody. Nobody chooses to be a checkout chick or a checkout guy. That's a job that they're taking because they need the money, they either need the hours or they need the time. My mum did that so she could go and work there while we were at home. It was a job that she could get. It was unskilled labor. And there's a lot of jobs like a cleaner. It's not a job that most people turn around and say, that's a lifelong dream of mine. It's a job that you take because you need the money or you need to survive or you need to pay your bills. And as those jobs are taken away in the future of work, how do people get a start? How do actually people learn the 9 to 5, if there is even a 9 to 5? But how do they learn that interaction with people? How do they learn to actually deal with a customer service or a process? But for the first time ever, it's happening to the bottom, the blue collar worker and the white collar worker at exactly the same time, because both of them are losing their jobs en masse, where it used to be one, not the other. I mean, Tony, what are your thoughts?
I think, just on that first note that you said there, as someone that's never had a job, as in never been employed by someone else, you develop skills along the way as we move forward through the situation. Like in a global financial crisis, usually there's a lot of startup businesses and they can usually do well because the bigger companies are crippled and can't be as agile, and the little guy can, and money's tighter, so people go with a cheaper independence. So I feel like we're going to probably see a boom in micro businesses during these sorts of situations. Like if you lose your job, you will find a way to make money. You'll do something. If you can't stack shelves because there's none of those roles anymore, you'll find something. Most people have at least some options. Not everyone, but you find, like most situations, you can find an option to earn money somehow. And I feel like these things in life is where you see those booms. I couldn't get a job in 2009 because the GFC hit. So I just kept doing what I've been doing since I was a kid and finding a way to make my own money, which was, digital back then. So like that I see as an option that you'll see more around you. But it's not necessarily the future of work for everyone, because I feel like there's still lots of big companies that are going to still exist, but it's just, it's going to be very different forever from this. Like there will be a hybrid no matter what. Like I don't think it's all, we're not going to see the death of the cities and no more big corporate towers, but there will be a percent, at least a double-digit percent of people that will start working hybrid with like partially at home, partially at the office and that sort of stuff. Because in one way or another, whether the virus or a virus is still around for a number of years, or if we just learnt from this experience that we don't need to do the 9 to 5 days a week. That just might be the situation we're in.
What if we had no jobs? Everybody was paid a livable wage. What if that turned around? And
that's like the universal basic income that we've seen across the world, where people who are not able to do the work that they would normally be doing have at least something, some sort of furlough, some sort of scheme. And I think what's really fascinating today with that is, how do we give people the opportunity to not have to work, especially when they are supporting their families, especially when they are supporting, a larger community of people. And I think this, this layer of income has actually questioned, allowed us to question at least, so what, when you're not working, what is it that you're going to be doing? What is it that you spend your time doing? Coming back to what Tony was saying as well, that if we are going to be working in a particular way, then maybe there is a muscle, right? Just like there is that creative muscle that Finn talks about. Maybe there is this muscle of being able to go out and find yourself something to do. But is that activity necessarily the work activity? Of course, we need to earn something. And of course, we are paying for all of the the bills, and we're paying for all of the other aspects of our lives that we need to exchange with. And I think maybe what's going to happen in the future is we're going to look at these exchanges and recognize whether these are fair exchanges and whether these exchanges have alternatives.
To Adam's point about privilege, it's really interesting because I find having nothing and not having a job is the place where creativity flourishes about how to figure out how to get a job. I spent so much of my life not having anything, just doing the things I like. And now I've got privilege because I've got something out of that. And it's like, that's okay. And I have, and way more than a lot of other people. I think that a lot of people go, oh, well, that's okay for you because you can do it. And it's like, yeah, but I had to start somewhere. Sure, I didn't have big mortgages when I started doing it. But my point is, if the future work means that you're going to be out of a job, why not start to look at the things that interest you, that you're passionate about? How do you draw a line between what your experience in the working life and what you're passionate about? What does that connection look like? And what job could that potential value facilitate in the future? Because you might find that your experience and skill set that you have, your current working environment, with the things that you're passionate about, might actually provide you with a whole brand new opportunity you've never seen before. I know someone that's just left Pitcher Partners, a major global firm, because she loved horses, and now she's set up an incredible business using her skills that she used in Pitcher Partners with what she does with horses. And you've seen this time and time again, being able to sort of fuse what was and what is into being able to sort of make this co-creation of what does a future value look like for me, rather than being afraid of, oh, well, I like this, but I do that, and there is no correlation. There is always a correlation. It's about the creative. How do you put that together, and how do you look at value points, not just what you do, but the value that creates?
Yeah, look, I don't disagree with that at all. The only thing I would just say, and again, I think the privilege check is not about saying people who have made it and people that do have privilege don't deserve what they have. It's more about just recognizing that the steps for other people might be significantly harder. And so
I get it. Yeah, I get that.
So for people who, if you're in an underprivileged community that doesn't have good education, that's unsafe to go out at night, that doesn't have access to good internet, that really struggles to get a computer, as an example, and the vehicle for you is to be able to go to school during the day, clean offices at night, just so you can get an education and get up that first rung, and all of a sudden those cleaning jobs aren't available, and all of a sudden you can't go and work at the local restaurant, then there's no money to be able to put yourself through school, which means there's no opportunity to get onto that first rung. And I think one of the things that, for me, the biggest opportunity of what future of work is as it relates to the pandemic is that if we are genuinely interested in enhancing and improving society and going from where we were, which was going to be a complete friggin' disaster anyway, this is an opportunity for us to go, hang on a second, whatever we create going forward, let's not make the same mistakes that we made before. Let's actually really think about, as we transition into the new, how we can make sure that people who struggled in the old system don't have to struggle quite as much or at all in the new system. And that's the part of the conversation that I'm not yet hearing much in the future of work conversation.
Well, so Adam, just sorry to keep talking here, but I worked on a project with the city of Los Angeles, which was to build a university in Watts, which is a black area of Los Angeles, with a whole group of people. And I was working on a project, and it was called Block Tech University. It was a university for kids who were black, who had no money. And we built these programs around teaching them technology, bringing the sponsorship in from Sony, Microsoft, a whole heap of different providers, having them being beta testers. And there was a commercial model behind it where the kids didn't pay anything for their education. Now, that project didn't get up because the money that was coming in was coming from UAE. It actually got up in Africa. And so it's actually one of the first digital cities that's growing in Africa now. And so I was contacted by them recently about getting involved in that project. But this is what I mean about, so these people don't have that capability, but there are other people that are looking for the opportunity to see how to connect those people. So it's
I
this
agree. I completely agree. And it's interesting that you said UAE, because when I was last in Abu Dhabi, one of the things that astounded me the most when I went into one of their tech schools, so I was on an innovation trade mission. I went into a tech school that, is basically like a TAFE here in Australia. So you learn, how to build things and how to do things with your hands, as opposed to a university. But you walked in, so they did it was airline maintenance. And you walk into this pristine room in a tech school. In Australia, the government has gutted our tech schools, so they can't even find a friggin' screwdriver. But you walk into this environment and there was a brand new A380 sitting at a tech school. And all of those kids were working on the best possible equipment, which gave them the best chance of having a job. And the way that tech school worked was basically, if you came from a local public school in the environment, you basically applied for this school. And if your grades were good enough, the companies in the aerospace environment would pay for all of your schooling as long as you maintained a certain average, and then guaranteed you a job for 3 years as soon as you got out. And that is a brilliant, innovative way of making sure that kids are encouraged to get a job. Companies are ensuring that they're getting quality workforce. The people who are learning on the equipment that they're going to use when they get their job. The whole system is so much more advanced than we have in Australia and the UK, and there is so much to learn from the way other people are doing it around the world.
Well, you look at this. This project didn't get up in Los Angeles because of the red tape involved and the money that UAE was going to put into LA. They put into Africa. It just shows you how the red tape and process got in the way of progress. It was just crazy.
That's incredible. I wanted to wrap us up. I feel that this is such an incredibly strong topic, and would love to hear what your thoughts are. So please join us in the comments section of our episode and add your notes and your suggestions into YouTube. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, guys.